What's up, everyone? It's Josh over here with the Manchise, coming back at you with another UFC breakdown. This card, of course, is going to be headlined by the heavyweights Alistair Overeem and Augusto Sakai. Quick recap on last week, man. I had a great week last week. Really did well in DFS. In fact, I came in fourth place in a pretty big GPP, so feeling pretty well about what we got going on this week as well. I don't know if I like this card as much as last week's card, though. I don't think I'm as confident, but there's some things that we can certainly exploit here. We're going to start off with the main event. Alistair Overeem versus Augusto Sakai. Overeem been in the UFC now for a while. He's never reached the pinnacle, right? Like, he's never gotten the belt. But here he is making a nice little run again, because in his last 4 fights, he is 3-1. The only loss was that vicious knockout to Jairzinho Rozenstruik, where he dominated that fight for really the entirety of the fight. In the last 10 seconds, he was clipped, split his lip. Outside of that, he's got victories over Walt Harris, Alexei Olenek, Sergey Pavlovich. You know what you're getting with Overeem. And people say he's a glass cannon. Don't disagree, because we have seen him viciously get knocked out. But he's really looked much better since changing gyms and fighting with Elevation Fight Team. On the other side, Augusto Sakai, 15-1-1. Great record, man. And he's looked really good in the UFC so far. This guy's a Contender Series veteran. He's 4-0 in the UFC. He's got a knockout victory over Chase Sherman. Victory over Andrei Arlovsky and Blagoy Ivanov. They were both pretty close fights. And then, of course, a knockout against Marcin Tybura. Betting odds in this one, they're getting a little bit closer. I mean, you can get Overeem now at -150. Overeem's a slight favorite. Augusto Sakai plus 130, plus 136, depending on where you're betting. I really like Alistair Overeem in this fight. And I was a guy that was willing to write him off not too long ago, right? Like, after he got destroyed by Curtis Blades, and then, that knockout to Jairzinho Rozenstruik, like, it proved to me, like, this is a guy that his chin is made of glass, and it only takes one shot to land on that sweet spot to finish him. But the thing is, we now know, and we have legitimate evidence, that Jairzinho Rozenstruik is one of the hardest hitters in the weight class. We all know about Curtis Blades' ground and pound. So, I mean, even though Overeem has taken some tough losses, there aren't too many on his record that really stand out as like, oh, that was a fight that he should have won. I mean, listen to his opponents that he's lost to. Rozenstruik, Curtis Blades, Francis Ngannou, Stipe Miocic. You'd have to go all the way back to 2014 when he got beat by Ben Rothwell to really look at a fight and be like, that was one that he should have won and lost. For Augusto Sakai, he only has one loss on his record. That was a fight in Bellator against Czech Congo, a veteran, MMA veteran. But the nice thing about Sakai is we haven't seen him. He's durable, right? We haven't seen him get knocked out or finished yet. But he just hasn't fought the same level of competition. He's got the loss to Congo. Chase Sherman, guy that's been in and out of the UFC. Arlovsky, way past his prime, and that was a close fight. Knocked out Marcin Tybura, which was impressive. And his victory over Blagoy Ivanov was impressive as well. I guess the thing with Sakai is he does have some finishes on his resume, and it makes sense because he is a heavyweight, but he's not really a heavy hitter, and he doesn't come with a ton of output either. He's a more technical striker. He's definitely a good fighter. I mean, I really liked him in his most recent fight against Ivanov. But I just think Overeem is able to finish him here. And I'm going to look at some stats here. 3.66 strikes landed per minute, 63% striking accuracy for Overeem, and only 2.18 strikes absorbed. For Sakai, a little bit more of a busy fighter, 5.45 strikes landed per minute, 46% accuracy. And then I don't expect this fight to really go to the ground. With that being said, since Overeem has switched training camps and is now fighting with Elevation, he has attempted more takedowns and more grappling. He's got a solid 54% takedown accuracy with a 73% takedown defense. For Sakai, 50% takedown accuracy, but he only shoots 0.19 or successful takedowns per 15 minutes. So I wouldn't expect much of a grappling match here. I just like Overeem in this one. Unless Overeem is fighting a top 3 heavyweight, I like to roll with him. So we'll move on to the co-main event here, which is going to be a fight in the light heavyweight division between Ovince St. Preux and Alonzo Menifield. And I have just recently talked about this fight a few videos ago, so I'm not going to get too in-depth on it, but I'll just go general overview of my thoughts, what my thoughts are on this fight. My thoughts is that this is a pretty tough step up in competition for Alonzo Menifield. A guy with really heavy hands can knock you out at any point, but has he faced the level of competition that Ovince St. Preux has? No. And really that last fight for Menifield against Devin Clark scared me, because it just showed that he doesn't have a gas tank, or has not yet developed one. He gassed out super early, was landing some big shots on Clark. Clark was able to survive, and what ended up happening was Menifield was useless for the next 2 rounds. When you look at OSP, even though OSP has basically been a 500 fighter in the UFC, he's fought really tough competition, and he isn't a guy that tends to get knocked out. You have to go all the way back to Jimmy Manuwa in 2016. Jimmy Manuwa in 2016 is the last guy to knock him out with strikes. And even before that, he had never been knocked out in the UFC. So, Alonzo Menifield has heavy hands, but he's also going to be at a disadvantage from a size standpoint. He's 3 inches shorter, 4 inch less in reach. Quick turnaround for him too. 2 months after he really took that beating to Devin Clark. So I like OSP in this fight. Also, we haven't really seen Menifield's ground game. Does have a little bit of a wrestling background, but I'm talking more so about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. What happens if the fight goes to the ground, where I think OSP would have a massive advantage. So I think what we're going to see in this fight is OSP survives the early storm and then is able to really just grind and clinch and that's the blueprint to beat Menifield. Devin Clark used that, and I think we see that again. So I totally forgot to go over the Overeem Sakai DFS breakdown. I feel like an idiot for that, but I'll make up for it here. Just to give you guys a little bit of information. I love Overeem in the fight. I love Overeem in DFS as well at 8,800, just because there's the potential for him to get a finish, put up over 100 points. I don't think I'll have a ton of Sakai. I don't think Sakai is at 7,400 an awful choice, because he's still a heavyweight and you want exposure to that fight, but I really lean Overeem. For this Menifield St. Preux fight, this is a tricky one for me. If you're playing cash, I like St. Preux at that 7,900 price point. If you're playing tournament, Menifield's probably the play just because of that knockout early finish potential. I don't think it will happen. Give me, and St. Preux is a dog. Give me St. Preux at plus 110. Give me St. Preux at 7,900 salary in DFS. We'll still have some exposure to Menifield in tournaments because he's just hard to get away from at an 8,300 price point. So we'll move on to the next fight on the main card, which is a fight that's taking place in the bantamweight division between Sijara Eubanks and Carol Rosa. Carol Rosa just fought about 2 months ago against Vanessa Mello. had a really nice showing, won that victory by decision, but she landed a ton of significant strikes. And really, that's what we've seen from Karol Rosa thus far in the UFC. Even in her UFC debut against Lara Procopio, just high volume striker for Karol Rosa. For Sijara Eubanks, now UFC veteran, she's 3-2 in her last 5 UFC fights. Notable victories over Lauren Murphy, Roxanne Modafferi, and most recently Sarah Morris. Took a few losses there as well. Aspen Ladd, I think that was a tough jump up in competition and in weight. And a loss to Betch Kohea as well, which is one that scares me when I'm breaking down this fight. We know what we're going to get from, this is a clash of styles here. Karol Rosa's mostly a striker, good boxing skills. Sijara Eubanks, mostly a grappler, right? So she wants to get this fight to the mat. So far in Karol Rosa's 2 UFC fights, she has a 100% takedown defense. So, as someone who, looking at this fight initially, I was like, hey, this is a fight I want to avoid, right? It's a female fight, which, by the way, last week I was perfect on my female fight analysis. So, I don't know, maybe we're turning the tide here. I just have trouble seeing Sijara Eubanks really winning this fight without having an extreme grappling advantage. I think she's going to be disadvantaged from a striking point of view. And I don't know, so far we haven't seen Rosa succeed to any takedowns. So with that being said, I really like Karol Rosa here. I'm pulling up the odds. She's only minus 130. This is a tough one to bet. Like, I don't know if I'd feel comfortable putting money on it, but I would lean Karol Rosa. When it comes to DraftKings, it's hard not to like Karol Rosa at 8,500 price point because she's put up over 100 points in both of her UFC fights so far. 171 significant strikes, 120 significant strikes, and I could see her throwing up another 150, 170 significant strikes as long as she avoids the takedowns, which I think she'll be able to do. So I really like her at that 8,500 price point. If you think Sijara Eubanks can secure takedowns, and in every UFC fight that she's been in thus far, she has secured at least one takedown, including fights against Aspen Ladd, who's much bigger than her, then Sijara Eubanks is great value this week at 7,700. This is a fight that at first, initially, I was like, I don't know, I'd probably avoid it, but actually, I think this is a fight that you want to have exposure to this weekend, especially because there's only, I think, 10 fights on this card. So this is one that you're probably going to have some exposure to. I like Rosa here, but I'll probably have a little bit of both fighters. We'll move on to the next fight here on the main card, which is probably the most exciting fight on the card. A fight between Michelle Pereira and Zelim Imadiev. Let's talk about Zelim Imadiev first. This is a guy that I have lost some big money on. So there's always going to be like this sour taste in my mouth when breaking him down. But no, in all seriousness, this guy came into the UFC 8-0, looked super impressive, just finishes up and down on his resume, and went out and trained at the Performance Institute, UFC PI. A guy that I think Dana White and the rest of the UFC had a ton of, they had they saw a ton of potential in him. And in his 2 fights in the UFC thus far, he just hasn't looked good. The one that I lost money on was the fight to Max Griffin, where this majority decision went to Max Griffin. And then most recently, which is about 9 months ago, he was knocked out by Danny Roberts. So, this is a huge fight for Zelim Imadiev. I don't know why I said it like that. Zelim needs to show why he belongs in the UFC, and we haven't seen that so far. On the flip side, he'll be fighting against Michelle Pereira, who is one of the most creative strikers in the UFC. He's had 3 UFC fights. He's 1-2, but the most recent fight that he had against Diego Sanchez, he lost. He was DQ'd with an illegal knee. So, it's not like Diego Sanchez really knocked him out or finished him there or even won the fight. So his victory came over Danny Roberts, which in his UFC debut, flying knee, it was pretty impressive. So they have that common opponent. Michel Pereira, I really want to take a look at the stats in this fight. One of the things I'll point out about Zaleem is in his first 2 UFC fights, he just hasn't looked like he's had a great gas tank. And he's really got just a brawling style, right? Like he wants to throw these loopy overhand rights and hooks, and that worked outside of the UFC when you connected and could put people out. And now you're in the UFC going up against tough competition, and they're seeing those strikes and they're countering and they're avoiding them and they're hitting you back and wearing you down. And that was my one concern about Zaleem, even in his UFC debut. Like, we hadn't seen him go past the first round. And we saw that against Max Griffin, and he really slowed down. Our striking numbers are really similar. Michel Pereira, probably better grappler, which is interesting. And Pereira so far has 100% takedown defense. So this is one that I expect to stay standing. When it comes to Pereira, though, he does have 11 losses on his record, and he has been finished. That's the only thing that concerns me. Like, we have seen Pereira get knocked out before. Whereas with Imadaev, he was finished by Danny Roberts recently, but before that has shown a pretty strong chin. When it comes to betting this fight, Pereira is minus 105, Imadaev is minus 115. I like Michel Pereira here. Just think that, this is a tough one to say, hey, you need to bet on it, because it's really a toss-up, and the odds suggest that. But I like Pereira in this one. As far as DFS goes, well, this is a fight that you have to have exposure to, right? Because of the unpredictability could lead to a ton of points. And I expect someone to get a finish here. So Pereira at 8,200 is someone that I will have a ton of exposure to. Imadaev at 8,000, I'll have exposure to him as well. Because like I said, this is one of those fights that you have to target. I'll lean more Pereira than Imadaev, but if you have to diversify your lineups in these GPPs, it's not a bad idea to have a little bit of exposure to both. Next fight on the main card is a fight in the featherweight division between Brian Kelleher and Kevin Natividad. Kevin Natividad's taking this fight on short notice. He is really a bantamweight fighter, but technically so is Brian Kelleher. Kevin Natividad is 9-1, and he's fought for LFA against some pretty decent competition. And he's looked pretty good thus far. 9-1 as a professional, 13-1 as an amateur. So that's what you like to see. Fighting out of Arizona Combat Sports, the Hawaiian Kevin Quicksand Natividad. Brian Kelleher, UFC veteran, fought a ton of people in the bantamweight and featherweight divisions now. Guys like John Lineker, Montel Jackson, Cody Stamann. I mean, he had a victory over Hunter Azure. Victory over Ode Osborne. Brian Kelleher is kind of a gatekeeper at this point, but it seems like whenever you count this guy out, he plays the spoiler. He just has had trouble getting over the hump against the elite top level guys. Brian Kelleher is really well-rounded everywhere. He's quick on his feet, good striking, really good submission skills. His specialty is that guillotine choke. If he wraps that bicep around your neck, man, you're going out. For Natividad, I had a chance to watch some of his fights. He's got some solid striking. And when you look at his resume, he's got some victories due to strikes. He finished Kyle Estrada, Tyler Bielecki, Isaias Gordo. These are guys that he's been able to finish in LFA and really look pretty strong with. My concern with Natividad here is, he's a guy that's going to want to strike, and Kelleher's quick. Kelleher's got a really good chin, and Kelleher's got some power in those hands as well, and Natividad is taking this fight on short notice. This is a fight that I am probably going to stay away from. The odds have Kelleher at minus 220. So that just shows you the respect that Natividad's getting, being it's his UFC debut and it's he's taking this fight on short notice. So I'm staying away from this fight. I lean Kelleher, but wouldn't recommend betting on it. When it comes to DraftKings, DFS, just don't like Kelleher here. He's priced up at 9,200. It's just crazy to me. You know, at that price point, you're expecting him to finish Natividad, who really, we haven't seen that yet, right? I mean, he was knocked out one time by Glenn Baker at LFA. It's the only time he's been finished. Natividad's not a bad play at 7,000, depending on how you're constructing your lineups. You know, if you're going to have Moises and Azur in your lineup, then you can certainly go ahead and pencil in a guy like Natividad, who I think he's a solid dog and should 7,000. I mean, he can pull out a victory, man, and if he does, he's definitely going to be in the optimal. So, I'm not going to have a ton of exposure to either of these fighters. I might have a few lineups with Natividad in them. All right, we'll move on to the next fight here, which is the last fight on the main card. Fight between Thiago Moises and Jalen Turner, and this is one that I am looking forward to watching. I think it's one of the better fights on this card. Thiago Moises 13-4 so far, and he is 2-2 in the UFC. 13-4 as a pro, 2-2 in the UFC. Jiu-jitsu specialist. His first fight was a tough one, man. First draw was against Beneil Dariush, but he did go the distance against him. Has victories over Kurt Hallabal, and most recently a victory over Michael Johnson, where that was impressive because it looked like he was getting boxed up a little bit initially in that fight. Pulled a leg lock, ankle lock, was able to finish Michael Johnson. Has a loss to Damir Ismagulov, and that was a tough fight, man. Ismagulov looks like a stud, really good grappling skills. For Jalen Turner, another guy that, you know, both these guys have the Contender Series background, and both these guys took really tough first fights. Jalen Turner's first fight was against Vicente Luque, short notice, going up in weight, and he was knocked out. After that, he had a victory over Kalen Potter, was able to finish Kalen Potter. Lost a close one to Matt Frevola, and then in his most recent fight, knocked out Joshua Kulabau. You know, this is an interesting fight to break down because Moises has the one big advantage in this fight, and that's in his jiu-jitsu, right? Like, black belt in jiu-jitsu, trains with American Top Team. If this fight goes to the mat, I expect him to sub Jalen Turner. I gotta be honest. When it comes to their striking, they're pretty even. Jalen Turner, though, has such a big height and reach advantage in this fight that if this fight stays standing, then I think he'll be able to utilize that height and reach advantage, control the distance, land that jab. You know, is he able to do that? I'm not sure. Jalen Turner's grappling, right? Like, that's what I want to take a peek at, those grappling numbers. Jalen Turner, 76% takedown defense. Thiago Moises, 28% takedown accuracy. So we don't see great grappling from Moises. Like, he's great with his BJJ, but can he get it to the mat? Can he get it to the mat? And if you're Turner, I don't want to take Moises down because he might be able to reverse and end up putting you in a bad spot. It's just a very difficult fight for me to break down. I think I'll have some exposure to Jalen Turner, especially because he's a guy that has been able to finish opponents in the UFC so far. He's a solid dog to bet on here as well at plus 140. You know, I guess this is a fight that maybe you bet the unders in. Like, let's look at the odds. under 2.5 rounds is minus 160. It's not a bad bet. Because I could see this fight going either way. I could see Turner finishing him with strikes. I could see Moises finishing Turner with a submission. All right, so when it comes to DraftKings, this is another fight that you probably want to target. Moises priced up at 9,000. Don't know if I love him at that price. Jalen Turner, 7,200. It's really hard not to have him in your lineup at that price because of his finishing prowess. It's just so difficult to get away from him at that price point. So with that being said, I'll probably have a lot of Jalen Turner, and I think he's going to be the chalk dog. But that's okay. Sometimes those chalk dogs are what you need to be in the optimal lineup, right? Like sometimes you need exposure to those types of fighters. So get yourself a little bit of Jalen Turner. You know, with Jalen Turner, it's do you pay up for, do you spend money on Jalen Turner, or do you pivot and go Natividad, or pivot and go Montana De La Rosa? I don't know, it's a difficult one. All right, we're gonna move on to our prelims for Saturday night's card. Featured prelim, Bartosz Fabinski versus Andre Muniz. This is a fight that's taking place in the middleweight division. And yes, we have a Bartosz Fabinski sighting. This is a guy that has been in the UFC for a while, but is not very active. He's got victories over Darren Stewart, Emil Meek, Hector Urbina, Gareth McClellan. 15-3 professional record, man. No slouch. On the flip side, Andre Muniz had a few fights on the Contender Series, made his UFC debut against Antonio Arroyo 9 months ago and won that fight by decision. Arroyo definitely will have the jiu-jitsu advantage. Probably also has a bit of a striking advantage as well in this fight. But Fabinski is just an absolute beast of a wrestler, grappler, sambo background, judo background, and I really like him in this fight. Fabinski's minus 160. Those odds make sense to me. I want to be all over that. I think the way this fight plays out is that as Muniz, as good as a jiu-jitsu practitioner as he is, I don't know if he's dangerous enough to sub Fabinski here. Now I know Fabinski does have that submission loss to Prazeres. That was about 2 years ago. So I'm not saying that Fabinski, but is Muniz on the same level as Prazeres? I'm not sure. Prazeres, UFC veteran, has fought a lot of tough guys. And the thing is with Fabinski, with Muniz, is he better as an offensive jiu-jitsu practitioner, or can he pull subs from his back? Can he pull subs from in the clinch? That's the thing. I don't see that happening. I think Bartosz Fabinski just puts on a ton of pressure here, makes this a dirty fight, is able to take down Muniz. I think he's gonna wear him up against the cage, and I don't see Muniz pulling a takedown in that, pulling out a submission in that type of fight. Now, Muniz takedown defense, by the way, is awful, 33%. And Fabinski securing 7 takedowns per 15 minutes. The writing's on the wall when I'm breaking down this fight. So, I like Fabinski a lot here, and I really like Fabinski in DraftKings as well at that 8,600 price point. This is a guy that in every UFC fight outside of the fight against Prazeres, he's put up over 100 points. So I want to have a lot of exposure to him. For Muniz, I'm just so high on Fabinski in this fight that I won't have any Muniz. 7,600, I think there's better options. I'd rather have Montana De La Rosa. I'd rather have Sijara Eubanks. I'd rather have Jalen Turner. I think those guys are all just better value at that price point, the mid 7,000s. All right, so we'll move on to the next fight on this card. which is a fight between Montana De La Rosa and Viviane Araújo. Let's start off with De La Rosa. You know, number 12 flyweight. She is been really successful. She has been really successful in the UFC so far. In her last 5 fights, she is 4-1. Victories over Christina Marks, Rachel Ostovich, Nadia Kassem, and Mara Romero Barella. She did have that one loss to Andrea Lee. And Montana De La Rosa, she's long for the division at 5'7", and she fights at elevation, good team around her, and she's got some pretty good submission skills. Viviane Araújo is 8-2. So far, she's 2-1 in the UFC. She had a knockout victory over Talita Bernardo. She had a decision victory over Alexis Davis, which was definitely impressive. But she lost her most recent fight to Jessica Ai, and that was a fight that went the distance. We know Jessica Ai is not fighting at 125 anymore, right? So she's up at 135. Or no, is Ai still fighting at 125? She's bounced around. Either way, Jessica Ai, that was a step up in competition for Viviane Araújo. Viviane Araújo is a pretty decent sized favorite in this fight, minus 175. Not really sure why. She's gonna come out guns blazing, right? Like that's what I expect to happen. Which she did against Jessica Ai and had some success early on. Gas tank wore out. Jessica Ai dominated the later rounds. I think we could see that happen here as well. I wouldn't be surprised if the same thing occurred. Because you have to go back to, let's look at Montana De La Rosa. The last time she was finished was all the way back in 2017 when she fought Cynthia Calvillo, who's a stud, in LFA. She also was finished to Mackenzie Dern for Legacy. So, I mean, Montana De La Rosa has been in there with some studs. Cynthia Calvillo, Mackenzie Dern, Nico Montano, Rachel Ostovich, Andrea Lee. I have to lean De La Rosa in this fight. I don't know how she gets it done. I just think that she's going to get it done. Maybe she pulls a sub. More than likely, I think this goes the distance. So I like De La Rosa as a dog here. When it comes to DraftKings, it's hard for me to have a lot of exposure to this fight. I'm not a fan of Araújo at 8,900. That's crazy to me. De La Rosa at 7,300 is a good pivot play from Turner. I don't know if she has the same scoring potential as Turner, but you know, like I said, I think Turner is going to be pretty chalk. So De La Rosa is a good pivot and someone that you can pinpoint at 7,300 here on DraftKings and get in your lineup. She's someone I'm definitely going to have a decent amount of exposure to. So we'll move on to the next fight here in the prelims. This is a fight happening in the heavyweight division between Marcos Rogerio de Lima and Alexander Romanov, finally making his UFC debut. A guy who's undefeated, 11-0. But there's some question marks about the type of competition that he's fought. You know, he's got a ton of submission victories, a ton of knockouts on his record, and looks like we're finally going to see him go up against legit competition here in Marcos Rogerio de Lima, who has a professional record of 17-6, a UFC veteran at this point, has victories against Jeremy Kimball, guys like Ben Sassoli that he knocked out in his most recent fight. But, you know, the thing with De Lima is he was subbed by Ovince St. Preux. He was subbed by Stefan Struve. He was subbed by Antigulov. He was subbed by Krylov. So are you seeing, and those guys were light heavyweights. So you're seeing a pattern here. You know, the thing is, De Lima is a good striker. He's a guy with a kickboxing background. That's where he's going to prefer to want to keep this fight. Doesn't want to get into a grappling match with Romanov, but I don't know if he'll be able to avoid it. And Romanov is no slouch. He's got pretty good submission skills. We're going to find out real fast in this fight whether or not Romanov is the real deal. Because if he's the real deal, this should be an easy fight for him. De Lima is a guy that, can't make the light heavyweight division anymore, and now has to fight up at heavyweight. And he's a bit undersized, but Romanov's not a huge heavyweight. De Lima, I'm going to pull up some of De Lima's stats here to talk about these stats. 36% takedown defense. And only 3.78 strikes landed per minute. So 54% striking accuracy is pretty good. It's just, I can't back De Lima in this fight with takedown defense that awful. Romanov needs to take advantage of that, and I think he will. So if I'm betting this fight straight up against the spread, I like Romanov here at minus 130. I also like Romanov in DraftKings. Now you got a pretty good price point on him at 8,400. Heavyweight fight. This is a fight you want to, this is a fight you want to have some exposure to. There's a lot of, I will say this card isn't great, but there are some fights here where I think we're going to see some finishes. And Romanov is a guy that I think could finish De Lima here. I think he's going to sub him. That's my call. So 8,400, I'll have a lot of exposure to him. De Lima at 7,800. It's not bad to have exposure to De Lima, because if he has that striking advantage, if he can prevent takedowns, he can put up numbers, man, and he's always a guy that can finish you striking. He's got some submission skills as well. It's just his submission defense and his grappling defense is terrible. So this is a good fight you want to have exposure to. I'll have some Romanov, probably have a little bit of De Lima sprinkled in here and there. All right, moving on to the first fight of the night, Cole Smith versus Hunter Azure. Let's go over the stats in this one. Cole Smith 7-1. His only loss came in the UFC to Miles Johns about a year ago. For Hunter Azure, he's 8-1. His only loss was 3 months ago to Brian Kelleher, where he was knocked out by a vicious left hook. But before that, Hunter Azure had looked really good, had that nice victory over Brad Katona. For Cole Smith, he had a victory over Mitch Gagnon in the UFC. So both these guys, 2 UFC fights, and they're both 1-1. But the numbers really tell a different story in this matchup. Let's just go over these. Cole Smith, 1.63 strikes landed per minute. Awful output. 33% striking accuracy. Not very good. 1.53 strikes absorbed. 1.5 takedowns per 15 minutes, 30% takedown accuracy, 65% takedown defense. For Hunter Azure, 4.71 strikes landed per minute, 49% striking accuracy, 1.97 strikes absorbed, 1.5 takedowns per 15 minutes, 33% takedown accuracy, 81% takedown defense. This is an easy one for me. It should be no surprise, as Hunter Azure is one of the bigger favorites on this card at minus 225. He just has an advantage everywhere. He's the better grappler. He's the better striker. I think he's the more athletic fighter. Cole Smith, didn't really fight good competition before he got into the UFC. And even in his 2 fights in the UFC so far, he hasn't fought really tough opponents. The thing with Cole Smith is he's 5'11" as a bantamweight, which is crazy. But he doesn't really take advantage of it, right? It's not like he's really staying behind that jab and landing a ton of strikes. So, he's not Sean O'Malley. Man, I'm just looking at some of the records of the guys that he fought before he got to the UFC. 2-0, 3-2, 5-1. Like, who are these guys? And even in the UFC, Mitch Gagnon, 12-4, never going to be a top 15 guy. Miles Johns. Well, Miles Johns could be a good fighter. Young guy. We'll see what happens with that. I just think Azor is the play here. I mean, I've watched both these guys. I think Azor is just so much more athletically gifted. His technique is better, striking, and he should be able to take Cole Smith down whenever he wants. I don't know if he'll need to, but so I do like Azor on this card. The thing is, I don't know if this is a fight that goes to a finish. So paying up at 9,100 is difficult. It's a difficult pill for me to swallow because Cole Smith has shown that he's been pretty tough, man. He's never been finished. So I like Azor here from a betting standpoint. When it comes to DFS, 9,100, I probably won't have a ton of exposure to him. Cole Smith, 7,100, not a fan of him at all. Rather have Natividad, rather have Montana De La Rosa, rather have Jalen Turner. It's just what it comes down to. Pivot to Cole Smith if you'd like, but not buying into it this week. All right, so let's keep the hot streak going here. We're finally back in the winning column after really being money on last card. And I'm here to give you guys some more winners. We'll start with the most expensive fighter here, Alistair Overeem, 8,800. Just love him here. I think he can get a finish against Sakai. I think it's a big step up. This is a fight that I want exposure to, being though it's a heavyweight fight and it's a main event fight. After that, I will have Bartosz Fabinski in my lineup. Just think that this is a guy that could rack up a ton of points if he can land some takedowns. Which he's been able to do, 10, 6, 6. The guy just has really good wrestling skills, so perfect for DraftKings. After Fabinski, I will have Karol Rosa in my lineup, and this was probably one of the most difficult ones to decide on, but this is a fight that I want to have exposure to, which is rare for a female fight. And, she's got a big striking advantage here, and so far she hasn't been taken down in the UFC. So she stuffs the takedowns, she outstrikes Eubanks, she's going to pay up to that 8,500 value because of the amount of volume that she usually throws. That's what I'm hoping for. Alexander Romanov, 8,400. Call me a gambling man. This is a guy that I am throwing in my lineup, even though I haven't really seen him fight UFC type competition. He's got a ton of finishes, and this is a fight that I want to have some involvement in. And I like Romanov here because he does have solid submission skills. And like I said, De Lima has been susceptible to being submitted, and a lot of those submission losses were against light heavyweights. This fight's taking place at heavyweight. Next fighter would be Michel Pereira at 8,200. So maybe I'm crazy for saying that I definitely want to have exposure to this fight. Maybe that's not the right way to play it because it's such a toss-up. But just think that Pereira has an advantage here in his striking. I think these are two guys that are going to go for broke since they're both on 2-fight losing streaks. This is could sneakily be fight of the night. So give me some Michel Pereira, but I will have some Imadaev as well. Last fighter on my card here is Jalen Turner at 7,200. It was difficult for me to decide between him and De La Rosa. I could afford both of them, but I'm going with Turner just because of the upside. And as long as he's able to use his length and prevent takedowns, you don't have to see when you have a huge height advantage like he will in this fight. You don't have to be the greatest wrestler because you can really rely on your sprawling and getting underhooks, right? Because you have longer arms. So if someone shoots in for a double or a single up against that cage, you can use that length to your advantage. And I'm hoping he's able to do that. I'm hoping he's able to keep this fight standing because if he does, he should be able to rack up some significant strikes. And he is a guy that can put you to sleep in that weight division. So it's Overeem, Fabinski, Rosa, Romanov, Pereira, Jalen Turner. Lock them in your lineups, boys. And hey, let's keep the cash train going. Thanks for tuning in. Subscribe if you could. Hit that like button if you could. Appreciate everyone that tunes in. Catch you guys next weekend.